first of all, I'm very proud here to present our case study. It's called Regelneef, and it's a bit of an odd word, especially when you're not a Dutch speaker. But basically, it means the guy who arranges stuff for you, and that will be this guy. And also this application. It's a self-service application for Energy Direct. We'll come to that later. It is an iOS and Android application. It is beta released on May the 17th, and it's live since June the 7th. Current version is 1.5. That means that we have already did 5 production releases in our 3 weekly sprint rhythm. And we have now over 30,000 downloads and about 2,000 daily users. And it has a 4+ rating in the stores, which we're also very proud of. So, before we go into the app, let's first start with an introduction. This face looks familiar. My name is Jasper Boeijenga. I'm a senior web developer, currently working for Essent for 3 years now. And last year, in the role of lead developer, working with 2 Scrum teams for this application. It's a bit hard to introduce someone else, especially when he's next to you. So
yeah, that's me. My name is Rachèl Heimbach. I'm a software engineer at Quintor. Quintor is a consultant agency that focuses on Java.net, and we have all these full stack developers. And we started 1.5 years together with Essent and friends from Navara on this project, the Regelneef project.
So Essent, that might be a name that sounds familiar for the Dutch attendees, since it's one of the largest energy selling companies within the Netherlands. But we're not only selling energy under the label of Essent, but also under the label of energiedirect.nl. So, selling energy, that is what we do. And it's not really a business where you can differentiate in the product you're selling, because basically the energy you get from Essent is the same energy as you get from Energy Direct, and it's coming from the same socket on your wall. So you have to think of other ways how you can differentiate. One thing to do is with price, and the other thing is the service you're delivering or the user experience you're giving to your users. And that's exactly what we did at Energy Direct with a program called 100% Online. The goal of this project was to deliver a customer-centric online service. User stories got created, user journeys got created, and touch points were identified, and basically that is where the Regelneef was born. So, back in June 2016, the question came to our IT department, can you make this? Well, of course, but why did we go for NativeScript? To give you an answer on that, we have to have a look at 3 things. One of those is the requirements, so what is demanded from us. Second thing is the knowledge and experience of the people who were asked to build this. And the third thing we have to consider is the landscape we're building it up. So the requirements, what do we need? We need an iOS and Android application. It needs to have a native look and feel. It requires UX lab testing with user groups, so we have to adapt to design changes frequently and easily. Then we made a summarization of what technologies there are on the market and what categories they fell in. So when we have a look at this picture, you can see we have technologies with full native capability, partial native capability, things that are single platform or multi-platform. So we have native, hybrid, and our WebView applications. So if we plot the characteristics on them, and we take into consideration that within Essent we are morely web developers, we want this application to be multi-platform, and we want a solid performance, not really high performance since we're not doing really we're not building a game or something, then basically there's one player left, and that is hybrid. Still within the hybrid domain, there are of course a lot of technologies you can choose. So that is where the landscape comes into play. What you see here, and it's not very detailed to have a fully insight in, but it's just to give you an overview of what we're dealing with. What you see here on the screen is a page flow of just one part of the application. This is a part where the user can get an advice on the monthly amount he is paying to us. So what you see is a lot of screens, and when we go into more detail, these are the places where we do our API calls. This means that we're introducing business logic and state into our application at all these points. So that's why we needed a framework, not only to manage this state, but also to get this page flow right. And that is the killer feature that NativeScript provided us, the integration with Angular as a framework. So, having that said, we go over to the tricky part, the live demo. We'll see whether we can get this running. So, when we boot up the application, we will land on the timeline of the user. This is a timeline with an overview of events that have happened in the past or will happen in the near future. We can scroll through these items, and sorry, yeah, good, thanks. We can scroll through these items, tap on them, get some extra information, or go to the provided action. The funny thing about this is that it loads immediately, and that's because we cache this data. We hold it for 24 hours, and every time the app is booted, we do some loading in the background, compare whether there's new data, and notify the user. Of course, you can also slide to refresh. So, we don't have new data for you. When we go to the next feature in line, that's what I already mentioned briefly. This is where the user can get an advice on the monthly amount he's paying us. So when we go into this flow, first I have to accept the terms, and when I do so, I can fill in my meter readings. As you can see, things are getting validated. At the moment you are filling in, and also there's some nifty feature to put on your flashlight. I will not go through the whole flow, but you get the point. Other thing we have implemented, and this is where also native integration comes into play, is the live chat. Users can have a live chat option to have a chat with our call center agents, so they can get help immediately. And this is where we did some native integration that Rachèl is going to talk about later on, with some native SDKs. So last in line, this is your self-service section. You can see the monthly amount you're paying. You can also change that. You get referred to the advice, to the advice section. Also, you can see your invoices. You can have a look at them into more detail. You have information about the products you're using, and also your customer details with an option, for example, to change your bank account. Also, there is a section where you can provide feedback. What do you think of this application? And we have an app version. So thanks, Eddie, for that. That's basically covering functionality in a nutshell. And we also have a sneak preview, because in the upcoming release you can manage your energy products. So.
Yes, thank you.
Let's give the word to Rachèl.
Well, the bumpy road of an early adopter. Well, like Jasper already mentioned, we started around June 2016, and as pretty early seeing what the state was of the frameworks, the stack we were using. Like, for example, Angular didn't even have a final version yet. It was still in its release candidate. And as we all know, release candidates are stable. They don't change. Yeah, but then Angular happened. So that's more to come. And the NativeScript Angular bridge between the two was also not released. There was no major version yet. So there was like a 0.1 or 0.4 we started with. So it was kind of risky. Like the NativeScript itself was on version 1 point something, so it was pretty stable. So we looked at it and we were like, we had some, yeah, we had faith, as you need a lot of faith. Yeah, well, there's a point that is already talked about a lot today, and I'm trying not to repeat all the information that's already been said, because, yeah, I think a lot of us had the same issues during our NativeScript development days. And yeah, the main one in our project was performance. And I think what's different than the other talks before this is that we were so early on that our performance issues were not solvable at that moment, as the previous talk or the one before that said, like, yeah, just use ahead of time compilation since the start. Like, yeah, we didn't have that yet. It wasn't invented by the Angular gods yet. So yeah, I'm going to talk about two issues that we faced. The left one is our splash screen. You didn't see it because we had this super fast app with cache data. And we have like the other screen. But our boot time was at some point 8 to 15 seconds. And on my phone, I had the HT1X. It's not that bad of a phone. But back then, I thought like the app was hanging. It froze, but it was just loading because it was doing so much in the background that it just didn't perform at all. And the second issue is this back button over there. We already displayed the timeline and there are detail pages. But if you clicked on this back button, it would take you like 2 to 4 seconds to go back. And that's unacceptable. We cannot release this. So how did we solve this? Well, first we had to see what the problem actually is, right? So the source code was not optimized. We got a lot of tips today how to optimize those things. Yeah, too much I/O operation, like with all the source code that gets loaded in. And we had some performance loss because NativeScript Angular wasn't a fully finished product yet. So there were no optimizations we have today. They were simply not there yet. So the savior, Angular ahead of time compilation. So at some point, like our project grew like over time, like the frameworks also matured. So as soon as they got released, we tried to implement the ahead of time compilation because we just didn't have the performance we needed. And there was one issue though. It's called Angular. And this issue is, like I mentioned before, we started in an early release candidate. And suddenly Angular decided, like, let's introduce modules. Well, we didn't have modules yet. We already started. So we had a big chunk of functionality already there. And suddenly, yeah, there are modules. So this was our application, very, very abstract. So there's a component tree, you inject your dependencies in certain components. Your components know of what components should be there. So you're really building a tree. So at some point, we had to restructure like a lot to contain them in modules because, yeah, we simply didn't have those modules yet. And ahead of time compilation and all the new features are like looking at, for example, modules. There was a lot more problems with ahead of time. Maybe the best tip of today was ahead of time compilation. Do it from the start. It was one of the talks who said that, like, please do that because else we also got like a big log of errors to fix, which took us way too long. Yeah, after we introduced ahead of time compilation, after a lot of pain and suffering, we could quite easily implement the lazy loading. And I was about to explain how that kind of works, but everybody knows by now today, at the end of the day, what lazy loading is. So first, we had our initial load, which was everything. and we reduced that to only the splash screen and one of the first pages. So instead of getting all the code necessary, only the minimum needed to show the first screen. And afterwards, in the background, we just load the other source code. It's not that important from that point onwards. But this means we also had to restructure our application. So what happens if the user is logged in? Well, we see the welcome screen. What happens if we're already logged in? We continue immediately to the timeline. So there are some architectural things we also had to change. And this is the risk of being an early adopter. Like, we already started when the frameworks were not even finished yet. And yeah, this is inevitable. And eventually, NativeScript Angular matured. So every now and then, we got a free performance boost from optimizations from the framework itself. Like under the hood, stuff happened. So NativeScript got an update. We're now at 3 point something. And we started in 1, so even at the core of NativeScript, things improved. So it matured, our project matured. So eventually, we reduced our boot time to 3 to 6 seconds, depending on what device we have. We just got a load of tips from the other talk about performance. There's a few steps we missed, so maybe we can reduce it even more. So that's a good thing. So ahead of time compilation, lazy loading, and the updates really helped us a lot already in the start. At the end, even. Well, the famous back button issue at Essent. Well, the reason it's not really. I think NativeScript is not really completely accountable for this issue, because it's also like how we had to deal with the means we had. Meaning the timeline we just showed should be a list view, but by the time we were implementing that timeline, the list view had a lot of issues. In combination with Angular. So at that point, we decided to go for the quick fix of a scroll view. And the scroll view performs very well if you have a small timeline. But features grow. Oh, here it is. So we went for the scroll view, but eventually you get more requirements, you get more, the timeline grows. So the timeline size outgrew the scroll view's performance, the capabilities, which meant that every time we load the timeline, the whole list gets rendered as a whole, meaning after we get the splash boot, afterwards there's another 3 to 4 seconds rendering for the whole list. So if you go to a detail page, you go back, we have to do the rendering again. So it was just awful. Like, if I would be a customer, I would delete the app and never use it again, because it was really a pain. So how did we fix that? Well, the NativeScript Angular update made sure that the list view was doing better. Also being more clever with Angular templates within the list view itself. And we had to do a rewrite. And the rewrite was based on not necessarily the implementation of the list view by NativeScript, but also just the Android implementation of it. Like how to optimize a list view on the native side also helped us a lot. Because you see, all these kind of timeline items were separate components, because web components, and we neatly said like, okay, this is the start, a contract start component, we make a component, the contract end is a component, and suddenly you have a list of like 10 components, maybe 15 different components, and list views are not optimized to render different templates. So in our rewrite, we just revamped the whole structure. So we ended up with maybe 2-3 different templates, and we just made sure that we interpolate the data that's different in it. So the list view can do its caching, the list view can do its performance optimizations. And that is a pretty big difference with how you would work with it on the web. Because we're in a native environment, so someone else also mentioned that you cannot just proceed like you would do on the web. There are some things you have to take into account. And yeah, both resulted in a good performant app. Like the back button works as you would expect. We click it, we go back. It's a lot better now. So during the bumpy road we also had a lot of help from the community of NativeScript. It's also worth mentioning today, because before the forum days of NativeScript, there was only a Slack channel, and we regularly were on Slack asking like, hey, we're facing this issue, because we felt like beta testers for a framework, because there was so much not done yet. So we got a lot of help from a lot of people, and the community really tried to help us out. And in our turn, we also tried to help other people who were facing the same issues at that time. Even though 90% of the questions was resolved by remove platforms or remove node modules. So we could also help people out, like, hey, did you remove your platforms? And other stuff. And besides that, we also used a lot of plugins. And I'm not going to mention Eddie again. And so we also gave back to the community by implementing some plugins ourselves, because we had some external dependencies, like urban airships push notifications, the live person chat we just saw, and we use Adobe Analytics. And we implemented those SDKs and published them for everybody to use. So go home, open your GitHub /Essent or your NPM repo, and use the plugins we provided as well.
So, wrapping up, yeah, those guys are finally wrapping up.
It's time to go.
Having this all said, what did we do? We did not only build an app, we actually built a complete mobile capability within Essent. Not only within IT, but also within the whole business. So, like Winfred also mentioned, it's also changing the view on what you're doing. You're building a mobile application, you're not building a website that you can actually view on your mobile. We also implemented 2 new Scrum teams, and that's really worth mentioning, because it's for these 2 teams that made this app a success. 3, 4, 5, I really lost counts how many redesigns we had. That's the result of having a brand and a UX designer with an identity crisis, I guess. But it was a lot of work. And also worth mentioning, we can complete a full hour talking about this, implementing our automated build street. So having our applications rolled out to our testers immediately. And also getting the app in the stores, of course. Loads of headache and sleepless nights because of bumpy roads and redesigns, all the things that have happened, but also lots of fun. And when it basically all comes down to this question, because it's a question we've been asking ourselves a lot of times, but it's also asked to us a lot of times by very different people. Would we have chosen NativeScript with the knowledge we have today? And yeah, it's a Captain Hindsight thing, right? I mean, we're very proud of the result we're having, and even more important is that the customers also seem to love the product. So in that way, yes. But if we look back at where we have started and seeing now what risk we took, I'm not really sure whether we have taken this approach. But it is for the good help of the community and also giving back some things to the community that this product is a great success. That's basically what we want to close it off with.